Hi there. Fraud has impacted us and our economies locally and globally. In an effort to fight back against the risk, the industry has established an International Fraud Awareness Week to help drive awareness and prevention. This year, it's taking place between the 12th and 18th of November 2023. In support of the prevention and detection initiatives, SAFPS has put together a series of interviews with key industry stakeholders to help us understand the current landscape of fraud and how it's impacting us, our country, and the global economy. I'm Nazia Kareem, the Head of Product Development for Southern African Fraud Prevention Services. And joining me today is Farhad Rahamam, a senior specialist in the fraud prevention and security awareness programs at Vodacom, to discuss fraud in the mobile and telecom sector and the impact it's having on us as consumers and our economy. Hi, Farhad. Thank you for joining me today. So tell us a little about yourself and the role you're playing in the fraud prevention world.
Hi, good morning, Nasia, and thank you for this opportunity and for inviting us to partake in this discussion today on a very important matter. So I'm responsible for fraud prevention within the forensic services division here at Vodacom. And in terms of which, we're responsible not only for creating awareness internally, but also all awareness initiatives that we undertake externally to our customers, subscribers, and the public in general.
That's great. I'm glad to see you including your customers and the public in that communication.
Yes.
So let's get straight into it. What is the latest fraud trends that are impacting the mobile and telecom sector today?
So for us, the typical fraud that we experience in the telecom sector relates to fraudulent applications for cellular contracts. That could be either new lines, add-on lines, or upgrades. And typically what we term these is subscription fraud instances, and which is perpetrated by means of identity theft or fraud, in terms of which fraudsters obtain the personal information of a victim, assume his or her identity, and then perpetrate fraud in the victim's name. We also from time to time deal with sporadic instances of fraudulent SIM swaps. And these are essentially linked to online internet or cell phone banking, in terms of which our customers and subscribers' SIM cards are fraudulently SIM swapped in order to intercept one-time PINs with a view to defraud these victims of their monies through fraudulent transactions on their bank accounts. Besides these fraud types that we deal with, insofar as the latest trends that we experience, these relate to widespread scams in terms of which individuals and businesses are targeted on a daily basis. The most commonly experienced is phishing scams, which can take the form of fraudulent messages or communications that are sent via SMS, social media, telephone calls, or carefully crafted emails that appear to be legitimate or from legitimate sources, and which is intended to trick, deceive, or manipulate victims and defraud them in the process. The thing with scams and what we are experiencing is that they are everywhere, and scammers are continually targeting people across the racial and social divide. And my personal view is that getting caught up in a scam is really not a reflection on you as a person, or pure poor judgment on your part, because scams are by their very nature designed to trick, deceive, and defraud victims and steal their personal and or confidential information.
That is very true. Scammers are very innovative in the way they actually target their victims. And we need to make sure that we understand as ourselves and you as the victims that it's not you, it is the scammer. And it's unfortunately anybody can be targeted, even me, including
Definitely.
Farhad sitting
Yes.
as experts in the industry. There's no discrimination between a possible victim. So let's quickly go forward a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the smart devices. Today, smart devices are enabling us to manage and document our lives while we are constantly on the move 24/7. How has the advancements in the smart technologies implemented in the telecoms industry from a crime risk perspective impacted your world? What are the changes you are seeing, and what are you guys doing to help protect the consumer?
Okay, well, Nazia, while advances in technologies, as you rightly say, have impacted on most aspects of our daily lives, the unfortunate thing is that the same technology is also being abused and exploited by cyber criminals and scammers for fraudulent purposes. The biggest impact of technology so far is that it has moved the world further into the digital space and intensified the demand for e-commerce services, resulting in more opportunities for cyber criminals to commit fraud. The same technology has also enhanced the capacity of these threat actors to perpetrate a range of crimes and fraudulent activities, not only on a much larger scale, but also then involving multiple victims and across various platforms and applications. And last but not least, it is most importantly allowed cyber criminals to become a bit more sophisticated in their crimes, and which makes it a bit more difficult to detect in some instances. In terms of cyber-related risks, this often involves what we're experiencing, the dissemination of malicious links or malware, and spyware or ransomware attacks by cyber criminals to either defraud victims, steal their personal information, and pass it on to other parties without the victim's knowledge, or take control of computers or devices by encrypting information and blocking access to that. Then, regarding data breaches, these have become far too common and almost a frequent occurrence. While data breaches is in itself not new, it has been fueled by the current work from home arrangements that many organizations are now resorting to, and with employees who are now able to work from home using more internet connected devices, which then opens the door for tech savvy criminals to exploit and target users and their devices in order to steal access credentials such as passwords, etc. And which is one of the most, common reasons for data breaches, and that is compromised details.
I think one of the points you mentioned earlier about the malware on devices, an SMS link or a link in an SMS actually would be one of those trigger points that could actually install that malware on the device. Am I correct? It's in assuming so?
Yes, that is far too common, and the preferred method of cyber criminals to actually, target users.
All right, so let's take a look at what's happening in terms of legislative side for protecting the consumer in this regard. Currently, we're seeing some big movements with the change in the RICA Act. At its core, the RICA was put in place to safeguard consumers against fraud and protect their privacy. How will the 2023 RICA Amendment Bill impact this? Do you think the bill will help combat the fraud and organized crime impacting our sector?
Well, let me start off by saying the RICA Act, as you would know, was introduced some 20 some odd years ago. And the intention was RICA was, on the one hand, to actually prevent criminals from using their cell phones for illegal activities. And secondly, to assist law enforcement agencies to track down criminals by requiring that every SIM card has to be registered with the personal details of the owner of that SIM card.
Mm.
Um, Subsequently, what has been discovered is that there is a problem with RICA or with the RICA Act. And the Concord, the Constitutional Court has found that the Act is unconstitutional on various grounds, including, amongst others, the infringement of privacy rights, given that people don't have the opportunity to safeguard their rights by being made aware that they are under surveillance in terms of the RICA Act, and the failure of the Act to furthermore ensure that intercepted data is adequately managed and safeguarded. So subsequently, the Concord has, in its judgment, ordered Parliament to actually amend the RICA Act and to address the defects identified by the court, specifically relating to the issues of privacy, and to ensure that where communications have been intercepted, um, and people need to be notified after the fact in order that they can eventually take steps to protect themselves and their privacy. Now, as you would know, until now, most people who were actually spied on through the RICA Act never knew that this actually happened. And then also to create procedures for the safe handling of data collected, through these surveillance operations and so forth. So given the judgment of the Concord, the legislature's response to this was the RICA Amendment Bill, which was really intended to address and amend the issues as highlighted and ordered by the Constitutional Court. The amendments and changes to the RICA Act are mostly viewed in a positive light. And we are actually, hopeful in the sense that it will actually go much further to combat fraud and organized crime. The good thing about the amendment bill is that it, however, introduces some much needed safeguards for people's privacies and procedures for ensuring that information and data obtained from the interception of communications is protected, managed, and not abused or interfered with unlawfully.
That would be great because the data then can also be admissible in court under the right circumstances and allow for apprehension. It would be fantastic to get it right.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk about things that are impacting the consumers directly in a little more practical sense from the fraud world. SIM swaps. It's something that has been around for a while now, and it's something that is reoccurring every now and again. So tell us a little. SIM swap fraud and smishing are popular tactics fraudsters use to lure victims, especially in scams. Explain how the frauds are perpetrated. Perhaps give us an example or two.
Okay, so let me just explain it a little bit to say that, a SIM card is connected to a mobile or cellular number, and a SIM swap is a process that exists that allows customers to approach their service provider and request them to have the SIM card replaced in the event where that SIM card has been lost, stolen, or damaged, all the while maintaining their original cellular number. So a fraudulent SIM swap is a mobile-specific fraud type whereby fraudsters then approach the service providers like ourselves under the pretense of being the legitimate customer and request for a new or replacement SIM card to be assigned to the customer's existing cell phone number. Then we have smishing attacks, which is a type of phishing exercise that leverages really on text messages as an attack vector. And using smishing tactics, a fraudster or cyber criminal then poses as a trusted entity and sends fraudulent SMSs to victims to trick or manipulate them into disclosing confidential information. So some swap fraud typically targets those customers who use online cell phone banking and which requires for fraudulent SIM swaps to be performed in order to intercept the customer's SMS notifications, including in contact or notify me messages each and every time when the customer transacts on his or her account. And then to also intercept one-time PINs or verification numbers that is sent from the bank to the customer's cell phone number directly. So the steps that are usually involved in perpetrating fraudulent SIM swaps is that in order to successfully perpetrate the fraud, the fraudster requires the victim's personal and bank account details, including account numbers, internet banking passwords, and other related account information. So fraudsters then typically adopt various schemes such as smishing to deceive the victims into disclosing this information. And in some instances, besides smishing tactics that they use, information may also be obtained from consumer databases and social networking sites and platforms. Once the fraudsters are in possession of the victim's personal and other information, they would then approach a service provider under the pretense of being the customer and request for a SIM swap to be processed on the identified number. And like I said, this is done in order for them to now, take control of the victim's cellular number and then to intercept notifications and PINs that are sent directly from the bank to the victim's cellular number when there is any activity or transaction that the person performs on his or her account. Once they have now accessed the account, they may add new beneficiaries, transfer funds to other accounts, and later withdraw these funds. I would just like to mention the fact that it's important to note that fraudulent SIM swaps are always preceded by victims firstly being phished by fraudsters and then consequently disclosing their personal banking and other information. There have been various instances that have gone through our courts where they have held that a SIM swap in itself does not really enable a fraudster to commit fraud on a customer's bank account, and that in order to actually commit the fraud, the fraudsters must have obtained the customer's bank account number, internet banking password, and PINs, and so forth and so on.
Well, that is actually quite interesting. I guess from a personal perspective, we also need to be cognizant about where we share our information and who we share it with to help protect ourselves.
Most definitely.
So let's take a look a little bit about what the consumers can actually do. How can consumers manage their exposure to the risks associated to mobile fraud and theft? What can they do to protect themselves other than not disclosing their information?
Okay, so given these risks that consumers and our customers are constantly exposed to, there are certain measures that can be taken on an individual level to effectively mitigate the risk of falling victim to fraud and theft or other types of criminal acts. And it starts off by, you know, individuals really remaining vigilant at all times and trying to keep abreast of the latest fraudulent activities, scams, and schemes that, you know, they may encounter. Then it also goes a long way that they should educate themselves on the telltale signs or warning signs around phishing and other related scams. Obviously, like you mentioned now, you know, they need to also ensure that they adequately protect and safeguard their personal and financial or sensitive information by not disclosing this information to anyone under any circumstances. Unless, of course, you know, this information is disclosed to a trusted source or person that you know. Insofar as you know, your login credentials, it's important to never share or divulge your login credentials to anyone, or to allow people to use that login credentials to log in on your behalf. Then also it goes a long way if you know, individuals stay proactive by regularly monitoring their accounts and checking their credit reports for any suspicious activities, errors, or inaccurate information that may indicate signs of fraud or identity theft. Obviously, I think this, I shouldn't even really be saying, but it's so important that people refrain from clicking on unverified links or opening attachments in email communications from sources that they either do not know, weren't expecting, or really that appears suspicious. And then insofar as protecting your devices from theft, you need to ensure that these devices are always stored securely or in a safe place at all times. Then you can also implement things such as a screen lock to automatically lock your devices when these are inactive, and to use strong passwords and biometric authentication, which most devices offers nowadays. Insofar as transacting or visiting websites, you should only do so on trusted and secure websites, especially where it requires the provision of any personal or financial and sensitive information. Remember that a secure website displays a lock icon or a small padlock before the address, and always begins with the HTTPS instead of HTTP letters. And the S in HTTPS actually denotes that the site is secure.
I think that's very important in people understanding the level of security you need to implement to protect yourself and the level of awareness you need to keep yourself abreast of. In terms of your personal passwords, I think two-factor authentication is something that should also be included in as many opportunities as you can. If any of the services or applications you are using allow for such a service. And then also in terms of sharing your passwords, I have noticed many people choose to share their passwords with their family members or even their children. And as much as you love them, sometimes they are careless and they will obviously, at some point in time, compromise this. Refrain from it. Completely refrain from sharing your passwords, as Farhad actually mentioned. And to help facilitate this process about keeping abreast of what's happening, SAFPS implemented YIMA. It's a scams website that allows you to be able to keep up with the trends, take note of what's going on, understand the different scams that are taking place, and also how to protect yourself. Initiatives like these, experts like Farhad, are the people we bring to the table to help educate us and our community and protect you from becoming a victim. So please take a look at the YIMA website. It's yia.org.za, or call the call center, the hotline call center for YIMA. In case you fall victim, it's 083-123-SCAMS, and report an incident. It is important that you also play a part in making sure we can protect you. Farhad, I don't know if there's anything else you would like to add on the topic, but it certainly has been an interesting conversation.
Yes, I think just finally, with regard to two-factor authentication, it's important that you make use of two-factor authentication wherever possible, as this reinforces your security both across your devices and accounts. And it's also very important to perhaps consider changing your password and PINs immediately, after a fraud has been perpetrated against you, or if you suspect that your security has in any way been compromised. My final words would just be, last of all, it's also important that we warn our family, friends, colleagues, and clients regarding any fraud activities or scams that we come across or encounter, since the number one way for us to prevent fraud and scams is by raising awareness around these criminal acts.
That's correct. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you, viewers. Thank you. I hope the session's been informative, and hopefully you'll be able to protect yourself against mobile fraud and scams. Bye.
Thank you.